The World Cup didn't invent anything. The ball, the arena, the hero, the crowd, the ritual, all of it existed thousands of years before FIFA printed its first rulebook. And when you trace it back far enough, you realize the game we watch today is just the latest version of something humans have been doing since before recorded history. So this video is about exactly that. 10 ancient games, myths, and objects that show football didn't come from nowhere. Most people think the story starts in England in 1863 when the Football Association wrote down the first official rules. And sure, that's when the modern version was formalized. But the deeper story, the one about why humans gather around a ball in the first place, that story is much, much older. We're going to go all the way back to ancient Egypt, through Mesoamerica, China, Japan, Greece, Rome, and medieval England, and by the end, you'll see the World Cup completely differently. Let's start with the ball itself, because that's where everything begins. Around 2500 BCE, archaeologists found a child's ball in Egypt made of fabric and rope. That's 4,500 years ago. In Mesoamerica, ancient rubber balls have been dated to around 1600 BCE. In China, leather balls have been found going back to somewhere between 1189 and 911 BCE. So long before anyone invented a tournament bracket, a league table, or a transfer window, humans had already figured out the most important thing: a round object you can kick, throw, carry, and build a game around. The ball is older than football by thousands of years. And the reason that matters is because it tells you something about human nature. We didn't need rules to want to play. We just needed the object. But here's where it gets interesting. Because once humans had the ball, they didn't just play with it. They built places for it. The oldest known formal ball court in the world was found at a site called Paso de la Amada in what is now Mexico, and it dates to around 1650 BCE. Another early court at Etlatongo in Oaxaca goes back to around 1374 BCE. These weren't open fields or empty streets. These were constructed spaces, shaped stone courts built specifically for the game. Think about what that means. Before the Maracana, before Wembley, before the Azteca, there were already people carving out dedicated arenas and saying this game is important enough to deserve its own space. That's not casual recreation. That's a society deciding a ball game matters. And in Mesoamerica, it mattered for reasons that go way beyond sport. The Mesoamerican ball game wasn't just entertainment. Different cultures across the region played it in different ways, but they shared something deeper. A ritual meaning that connected the game to the gods, to power, to the movement of the cosmos. The ball could represent the sun. A match could symbolize the cycle of death and rebirth. The court itself was a kind of sacred space where the human world and the divine world came into contact. Today, when we talk about a World Cup final having everything on the line, we're using dramatic language. Back then, in some of these games, the stakes were genuinely cosmic. The outcome of a match wasn't just about who won. It was about what the result meant for the world. And that idea, that a ball game can carry the weight of life, death, and cosmic order, is spelled out most clearly in one of the oldest stories ever written about sport. The Popol Vuh is the sacred text of the Quiche Maya, and inside it there's a story about two brothers called the Hero Twins. They're ball players, and they get summoned to the underworld, a place called Xibalba, to play a match against the Lords of Death. The whole story is about sacrifice, cunning, defeat, rebirth, and eventually victory. It's essentially a myth where the game itself is the mechanism through which cosmic order is restored. Long before anyone invented the penalty shootout, before the concept of extra time, before the drama of a World Cup final, humanity already had a story about a match where everything was at stake. The Hero Twins didn't play for a trophy. They played to determine the fate of the world. And the reason that story survived for thousands of years is because something in it resonates. The idea that a game can be more than a game, that it can carry meaning bigger than the score. That idea also shows up in how some cultures used games instead of battles. There's a well-known interpretation of the Mesoamerican ball game that suggests it could sometimes serve as a way to resolve conflict symbolically, a ritual substitute for war between groups. You see a similar archetype much further north, where indigenous peoples of North America played lacrosse, a game known as the Creator's Game, with roots going back centuries before European contact. Communities would sometimes play lacrosse to settle disputes, to negotiate power, or to honor the spiritual world. The World Cup is often described as a peaceful war between nations, and people say that like it's a modern metaphor. But the idea that you can replace bloodshed with a ball game, that sport can carry the weight of conflict and resolve it without violence, that is an ancient human instinct. It predates FIFA by a very long time. So far, we've been in the Americas. but the game was developing on the other side of the world too, and in a very specific direction. If you want to find the earliest recognizable version of what we'd actually call football, meaning someone kicking a ball with their foot, you have to go to ancient China. The game is called cuju, which translates roughly as kickball, and its history goes back more than 2,000 years. FIFA itself recognizes cuju as a distant ancestor of modern football. Players would kick a ball through a small opening or net, and the game was practiced both as military training and as a form of entertainment at the imperial court. There are historical records of it being played during the Han Dynasty, and it continued in various forms for centuries. So when we talk about the invention of football, the honest answer is that the core gesture, a human being kicking a round object with their foot, was already happening in China 2 millennia ago. The rules changed, the context changed, but the movement was already there. And just when you think you've seen every variation of what a ball game can be, you hit kemari, and it breaks all your assumptions. Kemari is a Japanese game that has existed for more than 1,000 years, and the thing that makes it completely unlike anything else on this list is that there are no winners, no losers, no score. The goal is simply to keep the ball in the air and pass it gracefully between players, maintaining flow, demonstrating skill, and honoring the ritual of the game itself. It was played in formal settings, often at court, with specific clothing and procedures. The FIFA Museum describes it as highly ritualized, and that's exactly the right word for it. Kemari is the opposite of competitive football in every way, and yet it shares the same core object, the same gathering of people, the same focus on what the ball does in space. The World Cup is built entirely around the idea of winning. But one of football's oldest relatives was built around the idea of not needing to win at all. That's a genuinely strange and beautiful thing. But if you want something closer to the competitive, physical, territorial version of the game, you have to look at what was happening in Greece and Rome. The Greeks had a game called episkyros, which involved 2 teams, a field with boundary lines, and a real physical struggle for space. You had to push the opposing team back across their line. The Romans had something called harpastum, a fast, rough game played with a small, hard ball, focused on possession and movement. FIFA Museum includes both of these as part of football's ancient prehistory, and it's easy to see why. 2 groups of people, a defined space, a ball, and a contest for territory. That structure is recognizable. You could describe it to someone today, and they'd immediately understand the basic logic. The specific rules were different, the social context was different, but the fundamental shape of the competition was already there. 2,000 years before the Premier League, people were already sorting themselves into teams and fighting over a ball. So by the time we get to medieval England, all the ingredients already exist somewhere in the world. The ball, the arena, the ritual, the myth, the kick, the cooperation, the competition. What England added was chaos. Before the Football Association created a unified set of rules in 1863, England had what people called folk football. And folk football is a polite way of describing something that was closer to a moving riot. Entire villages would participate, with hundreds of people, no real boundaries, and very few rules. It spilled through streets, across fields, and into rivers. In 1314, King Edward II actually banned the game in London because it was causing too much public disorder. His exact complaint referenced the noise and disruption caused by, and I'm paraphrasing here, great footballs. So the King of England had to issue a royal decree telling people to stop playing football in the streets. That's how much people wanted to play. And it's also a reminder that football didn't arrive fully formed with clean white lines and a referee. It came out of the mud and the noise and the street, and only gradually got organized into something with rules, leagues, and eventually a World Cup. Which brings us to one last image, and it's the one I want to leave you with. In Neolithic Scotland, archaeologists have found carved stone balls dating to around 3000 to 2600 BCE. These objects are beautifully made, covered in intricate geometric patterns, and they're found in contexts that suggest they carried status, symbolic meaning, and power. They weren't footballs. Nobody was kicking them around a pitch, but they are spheres, made with enormous care and skill, treated as objects of significance and mystery. The World Cup trophy is a modern object of worship, a golden ball on a base that the best team in the world gets to hold. But the idea of a round object is something worth making carefully, worth fighting over, worth displaying as a symbol of power and achievement. That instinct goes back 5,000 years. So here's what the full picture looks like. The ball existed before football. The arena existed before the stadium. The myth of the hero playing a match with everything on the line existed before the World Cup final. The idea of using a game to resolve conflict existed before international diplomacy. The kick existed before the rules, and the sphere as a symbol of status existed before the trophy. The World Cup didn't appear out of nowhere in 1930. It became the modern shape of something humans have been doing for thousands of years, gathering around a ball and turning a game into a story worth remembering. What changed in 1863 and again in 1930 wasn't the human impulse. That was always there. What changed was just the format. Subscribe. We break down football the way TV never will.